Welcome to Turkey Trends, part of Ahval podcast series. I'm Nervan Mahmoud. The Turkish President Erdogan have said in a speech yesterday that he doesn't recognize the Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis and will never hold talks with him. He also reasserted that his country objection to Finland and Sweden membership to NATO and announced a new security zone inside Syria up to 30 kilometers inside the Syrian territory. To discuss that further, it's a pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Howard Eissenstat, an associate professor in St. Lawrence University and a non-resident fellow in the Middle East Institute. Professor Howard, pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Nirvana. Great to be with you.
Right. I looked at your Twitter account, and a few days ago, you mentioned that many smart people are trying to figure out what Erdogan wants. He doesn't know yet. That's what you said.
However, I think that's, I think that's likely.
So he yesterday, with all the grand talking he mentioned yesterday, do you think he made his mind and he decided to go up gear in upping the antes against the United States because he's unwilling to compromise, or because he going higher in the demand in the hope of engaging in dialogue and getting some compromise from the US?
So as far as I know, the United States hasn't responded to Turkey at all with regard to the NATO crisis. I think that Erdogan sees benefit in taking a hard line verbally and sort of saying that he needs Turkey's needs need to be addressed. And I think that, you know, politically, it never hurts in Turkish politics to be seen as taking a tough line in foreign policy. So I don't read too much into the rhetoric. But I don't. But it doesn't seem to me that we're seeing so much as a shift as a continuation.
Okay, as an avid follower of your writing and interviews, I watched a last year interview in Ahval with Yafuz Baida, in which you described the perception that Erdogan perceived the United States as a declining rival. I'm nearly shocked, okay? Not because I disagree, but because it's a little bit rich from the Turkish perspective to see a major power like the United States as a rival. Rival is always two people on the same platform, not someone who is supposedly a world power, but also declining. Who is the one who is declining? Turkey is the one with a high inflation, bad economy, etc., or the United States? Do you still that perception stand inside the Erdogan elite?
I do. I think that first of all, I think it's factually correct that the United States is, in relative terms, a declining power. I think that we are moving from, you know, the unipolar world of the 1990s to a multipolar world, and in that sense, you know, there's relative decline. I think that Turkey's assessment in that sense is much the same assessment that Saudi Arabia or China or many other countries are seeing. I think that from the perspective of current Turkish elites, Turkey's current travails are short term, and that it may require some short-term compromises, but that Turkey's overall trajectory, I don't think that Turkey has become less ambitious in the last year, despite of all its economic travails.
Okay, you mentioned Saudi Arabia. Yesterday, although all Western media focused on what the Turkish president talked about regarding Sweden, Finland, Greece, but many missed, or it wasn't that highlighted, that he actually invited the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to Turkey. So here is, like, if we look like a few months ago, or at least a year ago, Turkey was isolated both east and west. But now Turkey have reached out to the United Arab Emirates, have reached out to Saudi Arabia, despite that Saudi Arabia offered zero compromise. It might offer some financial incentive or trade, but it didn't compromise on something big like the murder of the journalist Khashoggi, which happened inside Turkey. So despite of that, it is Turkey who backed down. It is Turkey who is inviting and courting Saudi Arabia. Why the same Turkey that is courting Saudi Arabia is not willing to court the United States?
So I think there's a lot. It's a great question. I think there's a lot that goes on there. I think one thing that I think that politically and ideologically, compromise with the United States is simply harder to swallow. And I think that Turkey believes that the United States is misunderstanding how valuable Turkey is, and that in the end, Turkey's in the driver's seat because the United States needs Turkey more than Turkey needs the United States, in the view of Turkish elites. I don't think that's actually true. Right. I think that the decision with regard to the Saudis is part of a larger reset in the Gulf and in the Middle East. It is part and parcel of a reset with the United Arab Emirates, with Israel, with overtures to Egypt. And I think that what Turkey is trying to do is it's trying to reset relations in the Middle East, in part because it needs direct foreign investment, in part because it realized that it was being isolated in its conflict with Greece and Cyprus in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I think that it's really interesting the extent to which Turkey has been willing to compromise with Saudi Arabia and with Israel, and the extent to which it's really sort of upping tensions with Greece and Cyprus at the same time.
Let's put Greece on one side at the moment and talk about Sweden and Finland. Do you think the part of the Turkish calculation is that there are elections in Sweden earlier in September, which is far earlier than the Turkish election next year? So do you think that they are hoping for different results that will make them negotiate or having compromise from a different Swedish government? Or do you think they really don't care?
It's an interesting question. I think that the decision-making for Turkish foreign policy is very much centered on the palace. I don't think it's run through the foreign ministry and the professional diplomats. And for that reason, I don't think it's necessarily that insightful of dynamics within partner countries. In other words, I think that Turkey's decision has to do with sort of Turkey's ambitions in terms of foreign policy, Turkey's, the AKP's domestic ambitions, but I don't think that there's necessarily a lot of insight into the dynamics of what's going on in Sweden or the United States for that matter.
Which move back to Greece and to a bigger extent the United States. It's quite clear that part of the anger of Erdogan is how Mitsotakis received in DC, his speech in the Congress, the big lobby who's saying no jets for Turkey, and he's clearly upset about that. There are two camps in DC. One camp say we should understand Turkey security needs, and the other camp who even wrote articles in the Wall Street Journal recently saying, does Turkey have a place in NATO? At the end of the day, Biden is not particularly warm to Erdogan. I'm not asking you to obviously have a crystal ball, but do you think the Biden administration will listen to which camp?
I think that the Biden administration was, if we sort of go back 2-3 weeks, the Biden administration was clearly trying to find some way of rebuilding and maintaining what's left of Turkish-U.S. relations without necessarily selling the farm. So Biden's the White House sent a letter to Congress in support of further F-16 sales. I think that what Erdogan hasn't really understood, I talked about earlier that sort of lack of insight into the dynamics of other countries. He hasn't really thought about how Congress works and the role of Congress. And whatever Biden wants, the aggressive stance of Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in particular Turkey's current veto on Finland and Sweden, have dramatically reduced Turkey's already low standing in Congress. I think even those voices within Congress who were talking about compromise are less likely to do so today. So, I mean, it's striking to me how badly all of this has played in terms of Turkey's desire to reset relations with the U.S., because the reset with the United States is not simply a one-to-one relationship between the president and the president of Turkey. It's also how is Turkey perceived by Congress?
Mm-hmm. Right, but if I stand to be corrected, I mentioned, I think yesterday you mentioned that the F-16 deal is probably dead. I mean, something down that line.
I think it's really hard to imagine. Like 2-3 weeks ago, again before this whole Finland-Sweden thing, I thought that the chances of the F-16 deal going through were probably better than even. In other words, it wasn't by any means a sure deal, but that there was a good chance that the Biden administration would be able to sell this as being in the national interest to Congress. I think that Erdogan's rhetoric and particularly the position of Turkey vis-a-vis Swedish and Finnish ascension to NATO, I think that those have pretty much killed it. And I haven't been on the Hill in the last week or so I can't speak to that with assuredness. But my guess is that it's going to be a much harder sell, and it was already not an even deal, not an easy deal before this.
Which there are, if we compare, there are Putin with Erdogan or Erdogan with Putin. A lot of people wrote about the similarity between the two leaders. And there was a camp before the Ukraine war, there was a camp within the West saying, we have to understand the Russia security concern, we have to understand and not to burn bridges with Putin. And that's changed dramatically after Ukraine. And even now, most, obviously with the exception of France, most Western countries, including the United States, saying that that's enough, goodbye Putin, we have to understand that invasion is wrong, etc., etc. When we compare Erdogan with Putin, there is a huge similarity. He is now, in the beginning of the war, he stood by Ukraine, he criticized Russia, but he didn't join the sanction against Russia. All the Russian oligarchs have seek refuge in Turkey. And now if by going into Syria, if he proceed with his 30 kilometers, his army will say hello to the Russian army and will probably cooperate together in sensitive areas like Kobani, because that's a 30-kilometer zone if we're looking at geography, and that's Kurdish areas. Isn't that enough to make the people in the United States, in the Hill or in the State Department, saying enough is enough and it's about time to show tough stance to Erdogan?
So your questions, like, there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. I think I'd like to divide it into sections.
Sorry for the big question.
No. It's great. So I think that one of your points was, does Turkey and Russia, do they still cooperate in places? I think they do. I think they also compete in places. I think it's a very complicated relationship. And I think that both Erdogan and Putin have come to accept that it's going to be a complicated relationship. So the second part of your argument is, to what extent should we see Putin and Erdogan as similar? I'm not sure how much we get from sort of, like, if we're going to make a comparison, I think that we need to make like a complicated comparison where we talk about similarities and dissimilarities. And so I'm not sure that sort of the 280 character, Twitter version of that gets us very far. So I mean, like, yes, there are similarities, but I'm not sure how far those similarities go. I certainly believe that we would have been better off. We would be better off in general, understanding Putin or Erdogan or anybody else, but that understanding doesn't necessarily mean doing what they want. It means understanding how they view the world and looking for places where one can work together and where one needs to compete. I guess the last part of your question is, should we be taking a harder line with Erdogan? I think, again, it depends on what we're talking about and when we're talking about it. I personally would have been much more sympathetic to the F-16 deal a month ago than I am today. I think that foreign policy is made up of carrots and sticks and a lot of conversation. I sometimes worry that the State Department in particular likes to focus on the carrots and forgets about the utility of sticks. But I don't think that you can throw out one and just use the other.
That's a very good answer. And while Erdogan is the opposite, he always up, or at least talk about the stick very much, and then doing the carrot behind closed door when nobody is watching, probably. I know you are interested in history, and I want to take you back to a moment of history very important to me, is when I started to get interested in Turkey. This was in the 90s, when first a satellite CNN started to come to Egypt, my native country. And at that time, the Prime Minister of Turkey was a blondie lady called Tansu Çiller, which is completely vanished from the history of the country these days. Nobody remember her.
Not my personal history. That's when I started wearing interest in Turkey as well.
I remember her because she looked alien. She didn't look Middle Eastern. She looked European. But I remember the journalist asking her the question about the Kurds. And what is the difference between Iraqi Kurds and Turkish Kurds? And she looked at him with complete disgust in her face, and even me noticed, and she said, huge difference. At that time, Saddam Hussein was shelling the Kurds and invading Kuwait, etc. And she announced that she's willing to cooperate with Saddam Hussein to fight the PKK. That's why I bring that point in history now. Within days, she backtracked on that statement, and she said she sees the world exactly as the United States, and she doesn't want to cooperate with Saddam and doesn't want Saddam to do the work for Turkey, and Turkey is the one who will fight the PKK. My question to you, how can we bring back the Turkey of the 90s? How can we bring back the Turkey who still obviously have its own issues with the Kurds, looking at the PKK and any Kurdish with any resent to Turkish policy as traitors, but still unwilling to divorce the United States or have problems with the United States? How can we bring this Turkey back? Do you see that with Erdogan or without him?
So, as nostalgic as I am for the 90s and for the hair that I once enjoyed in the 1990s, Turkey in the 1990s wasn't a particularly great place. Like the war on the Kurds was extraordinarily brutal. Torture was routine. Hyperinflation was horrifying. Many of the things that we don't like about Turkey today are echoes of what was bad in the 1990s, or in some cases, continuations thereof. I think that with regard to Turkish-U.S. foreign policy, I think that within your question, is one that I would hear in Washington quite a bit. How do we bring back relations to where they were in the 1990s? And one could make the same case for Saudi Arabia or Israel or Egypt or all sorts of countries. And the answer is we can't. And the reason that we can't is because the United States isn't the sole dominant power in the world anymore, right? The strength of those relationships was in large part a reflection of a United States that had just won the Cold War and hadn't yet moved into the debacle of the Second Gulf War, that was riding high on the dot-com boom, that seemed like the model for what the future would hold. It turned out that the American century lasted about a decade.
Wow, I appreciate that answer. And I think you pointed out clearly, and maybe the people in Washington will see, that the problem is not necessarily Turkey or Erdogan, is a problem is within the United States, and they have to maybe look at foreign policy in a completely different perspective, not necessarily hard line, but not necessarily all carrots. And until they figure out the magic formula, we will see a lot of that. And I'm sure we'll see more from the Turkish president. Professor Howard, it's a pleasure to have you today. I hope you didn't mind my questions, and I really thoroughly enjoyed the discussion.
I had a great time. Very good to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Take care now.